the amazing group of guest speakers that I've managed to agree to come on today to helpfully provide some insight and advice for you all. And thank you to Francis, who has helped to coordinate everything. So today is supporting return to work webinar, and in fact, Eve, thanks for supporting return to work webinar for GPs who have or are on maternity leave. And I'm going to introduce myself fully at the end, just to share a little bit of my story, but just to say that this is part of the bigger work that we're hoping to scale up across London, and hopefully everywhere will be able to adopt it in order to make transition to and from work much easier, and the experience more supported. I know that many of you have been experiencing the coaching side of support with Francis, but this was really to try and provide some wraparound support around all the logistical, practical decisions and considerations that come when you take time out of work, particularly to have a baby. And so we want to just say welcome to everyone. If you're able to write in the chat maybe where you work and what stage of leave you're at, that would be great for us to just know your stage and maybe when you're going back to work. And I'm going to hand over to, is it Tim starting us off from the BMA? Thank you, Tim.
Yes, sure, absolutely. Right, this worked before, so I should be able to share my screen. I'm hoping you can see a slideshow there, some slides. Would it be all right if you just shout out, let me know you can see them?
Yes, we can see.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much. So yeah, my name's Tim Combley. I'm one of the membership managers here at the British Medical Association. I'm going to be speaking to you very briefly about who we are, what we do, but most importantly, how we support you throughout your entire career. And when that involves maternity leave, we're here to support you with that. Like I said, I'll speak for just a couple of minutes and then hand over to my colleague Claire. So we are the British Medical Association. We are your trade union. We're the trade union that represents all doctors and med students throughout the UK. We're here to support you throughout your career, protect your interests as doctors, and represent you collectively and individually on a national and local level. So this is just a few figures on screen to show some of the activity we have with GPs. Over 5,000 employment issues were dealt with from sessional GPs last year. We resolved over 70% of the cases within the first call. And then if it is more complex than one call, we open a case, and over 85% of the cases that we manage are resolved within the first 3 months. So I am very confident in saying we are very effective at what we do. We can support GPs on maternity leave in a variety of ways, and these are some of the most common questions that we get asked, and a lot of this is going to be covered in the talk from my colleague Claire. Now, you don't need me to tell you that these are unprecedented times for the healthcare service, and as doctors you may find yourself experiencing extra stresses and strains and worries that you haven't experienced before. And of course you're on maternity leave, you're bringing up a child, and that itself presents lots of different moments that can induce anxiety and worries and all that sort of thing. Please know that there's always someone for you to talk to, and the BMA has our wellbeing support services. These are free to all doctors and med students, regardless of whether or not you are a BMA member. They're two-pronged. You can either opt for structured counselling or go for peer support, depending on what you feel would be most appropriate to your needs. Hopefully I've mentioned they are completely free and open to all doctors. You don't need to be a BMA member. And yeah, like I said, maternity leave, on the whole, it's a fantastic time. It's a wonderful time, but it can be full of anxiety as well, and especially at that returning to work moment. My partner's currently on maternity leave herself. She's not GP or a doctor, but she did have a keeping in touch day the other day. It's the first day that she's gone back to work, left our little baby with someone else for, well, the first time in our baby's life, only for a few hours, but just that in itself, to someone else it might sound quite trivial and benign, but to a parent who's never left their baby before, it is something that can produce anxiety. So please know that there's always someone to talk to if anything like that happens. Now, like I said, unprecedented times for the healthcare service, and unions are never more important than in a crisis. And since the start of the pandemic, we've seen a large number of new joiners to the BMA. My prediction is once the dust has settled on the pandemic, there's going to be large public support for improvements to the working lives of healthcare workers. At that point, when we're lobbying the government for those improvements, the more members we have, the stronger we are, the stronger you are as a profession. So there's never been a more important time to join the BMA. You can do so using the link on screen, the /join 5533, or hold your smartphone up to the QR code. And that will take you to the join page. We've got a guide, a text guide for all issues to do with maternity leave, pay, contracts, that sort of thing. If you'd like a free copy of that guide, I'm going to put a form in the chat. Fill out the form. I'll send you a copy of that guide, like I said, free of charge. Won't hold you up any longer. Thank you very much for listening to me. I'll pass over to my colleague Claire. Cheers.
Thanks, Tim. So my name is Claire Kellett and I'm an employment advisor. So I'm one of those ones who is linked to a particular trust, and a couple of them are in London. So if your query isn't answered on the first call, then it might get referred to me and we can help with your individual trust. So that's how it works. We get to know your people and also practices in that area. So if you're a GP, we'll have a set of practices closest to our trusts. So I'm going to give an overview of rights for parents, new parents, and return to work. Inevitably, it's a pretty broad subject and you've all got your individual situations. So what I'll say is I'll give you general advice. I'm very happy to answer general questions if there are any at the end. I would say that if you've got anything particular, and it probably is particular, then do give us a ring because we can give you bespoke advice specific to your situation. So just to say that I'm going to touch on the areas. So maternity, paternity, shared parental leave and statutory parental leave. And these words all get bandied about and they can be a little bit confusing if you're not quite sure what each bit refers to. There's more information specifically on our website there. Any particular questions that arise, do give us a ring and we'll see if we can help you sort out those questions. Just to say as well, though, that you may have family, friends who've been in this situation before, or perhaps yourself. This might be your second time around. The rules are different or can be different, whether you're in the trainee session stage, already a salaried GP, if you're as a locum GP, or if you've progressed to being a partner. And all the rules are different and the advice is going to be a little bit different too. So if you are being given advice by somebody who's been there, done that, just be aware that their situation may not be quite the same as yours. Now, I'm not going to tell you all the stuff that you know already because you've been through it, but just to clarify the absolutely important sort of basic understandings. Employees are entitled to 52 weeks statutory leave. So when we say statutory, we mean it comes from the government. It's not about your employment, it's the government. And you don't have to take it all apart from the first 2 weeks leave. And that's important because a lot of what I'm going to say later on refers to that time period, the 52 minus 2 that comes up there. In terms of what you have to do to tell people about returning to work, particularly, before you go on mat leave, you have to say that you're intending to return to work for a minimum of 3 months. First of all, to get occupational maternity pay, which is linked to your contract. Statutory, you keep whether you go back or not. And also, once you are on maternity leave, if you don't go back for 3 months, you will probably have to repay it. And I had a case just recently where exactly that happened. So it's very important that you intend to go back to work and do so. While you're on maternity leave, if you decide that you want to go back earlier than you previously said, you have to give 28 days notice. If while you're on maternity leave or before then, you decide that you want to take shared parental leave with your partner, you have to give 8 weeks notice. And I'll talk about shared parental leave in some detail later, but those are the sort of the time limits for just making sure that you've ticked all the boxes. Now, you know about when your leave can start because you probably have started or you're about to. But one thing I wanted to highlight there in the rules is that it automatically starts if you're off work for a pregnancy-related illness in those last 4 weeks. It's very important, if this has happened to you and you were told that you had to start maternity leave early, if it wasn't a pregnancy-related illness, that would not necessarily be the case. And these things can be sorted out retrospectively, because pregnancy-related illness should not count towards your sick, ordinary sick leave entitlements and calculations. And as you know, when you move on and do other posts, that total of sickness can count. So it's important that if you're worried about that, that you get the record cleared up and make sure that that's accurate. Any questions about anything, you should be able to ask your employer's maternity leave policy. And it should tell you the rights and wrongs on both sides, all the timescales, who to tell when, how, and what to do. And very importantly as well now, of course, that there are risk assessments before you go back. Occupational health could be involved, and of course now as well, COVID-related advice. The Royal College has given advice which was initially fairly strong, and now it's become guidance, and we're in uncharted territory for a lot of this. So it's constantly being updated, reviewed, revised. So make sure that you do get your risk assessment before you go back. Paternity leave is now called in the NHS documents new parent support leave, because importantly it's not restricted to fathers, it's to partners of either sex. It's a statutory entitlement, and there are rules about eligibility like there are for statutory maternity leave. It's those first 2 weeks, 1 or 2 together, and it's linked to SMP, so it's the same rules in terms of pay and same amounts, but under the NHS terms and conditions that actually is full pay. So also, just to cover adoption and surrogacy leave, they are actually the same as well in terms of your rights and entitlements. So everything that I'm saying about maternity leave also applies to adoption and surrogacy. Just to say that the rules and eligibility are not difficult, but they're tight, because obviously if you're pregnant, you get a MAT B1 and you're also pregnant. If you're adopting or if there's surrogacy involved, you need to have the paperwork to follow up. Okay. And again, we can help you if you're not sure about any of that, or if that refers to you, give us a ring or a text and we can help you. Just to say as well, I won't go into the huge details about maternity pay because I understand that most of you are either on it or about to go on it. But just to say that, again, this is depending on what you may have been told by siblings and friends. Enhanced or occupational maternity pay, which is what you get under your contract, is separate from statutory maternity pay, which is what you get from the government, and which is again separate from maternity allowance, which is what you get if you can't get statutory. And it's entirely possible to get one and the other, or not the other. So it can be complicated, and it depends on your continuity of service, how long you've worked where, and all of that is something that we can basically help you with, because the rules are very strict, and I would say they are down to the dates. You can miss it out by a day or two. So it's very important for you to check your contract of employment, and this is where what I said at the beginning kicks in. Are you employed directly by the NHS? If you're still a trainee, chances are you're on the 2016 contract. If you're in a practice, is it a GMS, PMS or APMS practice? And the difference is that if it's a GMS practice, you have to be offered the model contract. If it's a PMS, you have to be offered at least as good as the model contract, and lots of them now are offering the model contract. And the APMS, they don't have to. And we have cases with GPs who are in a GMS practice who have signed a non-model contract, because you have to be offered the contract, but that doesn't mean that you have to sign it. So we do have a contract checking service. It's worth saying, get it checked over before you sign, because that will help you in the future. And one of the things that we often find is that if you're not entitled to an occupational scheme, it might only be statutory. And it's very rare for a practice to offer entitlements that are better than the NHS scheme. So once you have a contract ahead in front of you, it's worth checking it carefully. If not the one you're on now, then perhaps your next one, to make sure what those entitlements are. That contract should also tell you about your continuous service, which will give you your entitlements and your rights and wrongs. And also, it'll tell you about the contract end date. And if that's before you were planning to go back to work, that can affect the question that we had earlier about whether or not you have to pay back any maternity pay. Just to cover a few of the other grades, if you're on the retention scheme, you have the same rights as salaried GPs. And obviously, GPs may be on the retention scheme because they've already been on maternity leave for a while or having a career break, and they're coming back and then find themselves needing maternity leave again. Locum GPs are very often not employed directly. They're usually self-employed, and so they don't have any employment rights because they're not employed. So on that basis, they're not entitled to SMP, and so that would lead you to maternity allowance. And there's a website there, www.gov.uk, which is excellent at explaining your statutory entitlements, deadlines, timelines, what you have to do when. Really, really helpful. Now, if you're a partner, partner GPs are usually as well self-employed, because by definition they are the employers. So their rights are the same as locums, as in no employment rights. However, you should check your partnership agreements to make sure that maternity rights are covered in that, parental rights generally. And we also have specialist advisors. So I'm an employment advisor. We also have employer advisors, and we offer advice to both sides, if you like, within a practice. So do get in touch with us because we can help you understand those rights and wrongs. It's also worth considering income protection if you haven't got it sorted, because that might be something that you can arrange for yourself. So just talking about coming back to work after maternity leave. Just
Claire, sorry, I'm just going to give a 5-minute warning.
Oh, thank you. Intention to return to after maternity leave. You may have to pay it back if you don't. Don't return as a partner initially. If you're going to return, come back as an ordinary GP, not as a partner. You don't have to come back to the same post as you started on, and you don't have to come back full time, but it has to be for 3 months usually. Fixed term contracts I mentioned, it may not affect paying it back. Very important that you can also ask for make a flexible working request. Okay, I've mentioned about the risk assessment, and you're also entitled to a safe space and breastfeeding facilities if that applies for you. Flexible working requests, any employee who's worked for more than 26 weeks can make that request. It can be temporary or it can be a permanent adjustment. They have to give it proper consideration. Your employer, if they reject it, has to give you a full written explanation. And you can return to your original contract if you agreed at the outset that it was just temporary. There isn't a deadline for you to apply for it, but the employer has to reply to you within 3 months. So it's worth bearing that in mind if that's something that you think you might want to do. Keeping in touch days, you probably know about, but just to be careful, as a trainee, they are voluntary and you should get paid for them and get time off in lieu on your return to work, depending on when you took them. Whether it's full pay or half pay, you should get a full day or a half day. But GPs, salaried GPs, are covered by the General Whitley Council rules, and that says, I've put it there for your reference, any voluntary arrangements that the employee may find helpful. So voluntary is the key word there. Shared parental leave, just to cover it quickly, parents of either sex, statutory right to the leave and to the pay, uses the maternity, the SMP entitlement that's not used up in those first 2 weeks. The enhanced pay is not yet in the GP's model contract, but it is being discussed, okay? And it is in the junior doctor contracts, and the return to work rule applies as well to this one. So you've got to go back and do your 3 months. And the rules are really clearly laid out on the gov.uk website, so I would suggest that you check that. basically, it takes up the maternity leave that hasn't been used. You can take it both together. You can take it in turns. You have to give 8 weeks notice if you want to do it, and you can make 3 different requests for that time, and you can vary it between you as you wish. And you get 20 split as opposed to kick days, so keeping in touch, but shared parental leave. Very importantly, your contractual rights on maternity leave continue to apply other than pay. That includes annual and study leave entitlements. You get certain protections should you find that there's any redundancy or TUPE situation going on. And very importantly, maternity leave counts as service. So that counts, you're not out of work, you're just out of sight. You are still employed on a contract. And also just one other thing to bear in mind, as a parent, until your children are 18, you have 4 weeks leave, up to 4 weeks leave each year for each child, up to a total of 18, which you can take unpaid for family reasons, which may be bad or they may be good. Starting a child in a new school, going to visit distant relations, and so on. And that's again a statutory right, but it's unpaid. And finally, Equality Act, as you know, it's unlawful to discriminate against a woman because of pregnancy or maternity. And it surprises me to this day that we are still in a situation where this is still an issue for some people. If you feel that this has been a problem for you, whether it's counting sickness absence, whether it's getting a promotion and so on, speak to us sooner rather than later, because there are strict legal time limits for making any claim. And reduced membership, we offer it, but also your various bodies do as well. So it's worth checking with them whether or not you can get reduced membership as a maternity leave, or if you go back part-time and so on. And I'm done, Ellie. Thank you.
That was brilliant. Thank you so much, Claire. Really, really helpful. Harriet's put a question in the chat. I just wonder if you're able to just speak to that for just 1 minute, and then we'll. Yeah, effectively. You just make sure that everybody knows. Yes, if you've got the new post already, then you should presumably have already told the old post. But in terms of the contract, that's the same thing, as long as you are going back to work. It also does depend slightly on your terms and conditions. So I would need to be sure about your contract. I don't want to make promises there, but in theory, it depends what terms you're employed under. So I would say check your contract carefully, talk to your practice, and be absolutely clear on that, because I'm not quite sure where you work. But if in doubt, give us a ring. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Yeah, honestly, really, really clear and helpful.
And sorry if I was
think,
rushing at the end there, but if you have any other questions in the chat bar, I'll sit around for sort of 5 minutes, and if there's anything else that crops up. Okay.
That's really kind. Thank you so much, Tim and Claire. And I'm going to hand over to Paul Gordon. Thank you so much for joining us to give your expertise and financial advice.
Good afternoon, all. It's good to see we have our first baby in attendance, which is quite fun. I've been given the very straightforward and easy task of giving you NHS pensions and financial advice in 20 minutes. And I've taken up 30 seconds of that, so I shall skip on if that's okay. There are 3 NHS pension schemes, and what is essential for all of you listening in, and indeed all colleagues and friends, it's about understanding where you are and what you have. So could I give you, and I'm very mindful that baby is currently playing, so I'll type this in the chat box, a couple of things that would definitely be of use in terms of tracking down your service history, but also clarifying which versions of the scheme or schemes you are currently in. So on screen now, we have the 1995 section. So for anyone that joined the NHS pension before April 2008, this is the initial pension you joined. So you have a normal retirement age of 60, you build up benefits based upon how much you earn each year as a pensionable income, and as GPs, you receive 1.4% of that. So I saw the breakdown as to where we are and so on. So depending upon using a rounded figure of say £100,000, in this version of the scheme, 1.4% of that would give you a pension of £1,400 a year at retirement. And at retirement, the normal age, as it suggests, is 60, but you could retire earlier, but it would be subject to an actuarial reduction. You could retire later, and although it would still increase, it wouldn't be enhanced. Hasn't been a popular suggestion of late to retire later and later, but I'm sure that's the government slant as we move forward with the movement of the state retirement age, but we shall see. In 2008, and government are not particularly imaginative when they create NHS pension schemes, they created the 2008 version of the scheme. So anyone that joined the NHS pension after the 1st of April 2008, this is the version you joined. So the 2008 scheme. Normal retirement age shifted back 5 more years. So it moved from 60 to 65. The amount you build up each year actually grew. So rather than 1.4%, in this version, it was 1.87, so much higher. The same £100,000 a year of income will give you almost £1,900 a year of pension. But there was no automatic entitlement to a lump sum. You can give up income to generate a lump sum, but it's not automatic. And in this version, and indeed the newest incarnation, can I persuade anyone, a show of hands would be brilliant, actually a wave at the camera. Is anyone planning on working till 75? This is, I'm not sure if that's a wave or a gesture, we'll skip on. If you did, in this version of the scheme, they'd enhance your pension by up to 70%. Statistically, if you worked at the pace you guys work at until age 75, it's a very brief retirement, very lucrative, but you'd only get 1 weekend to spend it. So just bear that in mind. Sorry. And then finally, you now have the newest incarnation. And I'm going to run through how it works as a scheme and then unravel the mystery of this age discrimination case. So Claire mentioned about discrimination with maternity or paternity, similar scenario here, but on an age discrimination basis. The newest scheme came into play on the 1st of April 2015. And effectively, anyone that was more than 10 years from their normal retirement age in April 2012 moved across to this scheme, either immediately or will move across between now and the end of March next year. It is not given as a normal retirement number, not an age. It is a state retirement age. So right now, the highest age would be age 68. I think if any of your friends are or family are F1s, or any of you are at training practices with trainees in, I think that retirement age may well slip back, and it may well begin with a 7 by the time some of the F1s that start in just over a month's time retire. The scheme itself is different as well. It's called, to give you the jargon, a career averaged revalued earnings scheme. And essentially you get 1/54th of whatever your earnings are for each year you pay into the scheme. So to simplify the arithmetic, if you're part-time on a salaried basis and you're earning £54,000 a year, 1/54th of that is £1,000 a year of pension. And that is paid from your state retirement age. So anyone looking to clarify their state retirement age, I'll pop in the chat box. If you Google BR19 and just add your date of birth, it'll tell you your state retirement age. If you add your NI number, it will tell you how many years you've been paying into the system and what's indeed available. And then it'll tell you what you can accumulate and how many more years you'll need to keep paying in. Again, it is only automatically a pension, but you can take a lump sum at a later point. And then 2 confusing factors here. One is ERBA, which is the Early Retirement Reduction Buyout. And if I translate for a moment, effectively it's the ability to pay some more in to retire slightly earlier. And the earliest you could retire here would be age 65 without a reduction, but you'd have to pay in every single year from now on. And roughly it's about 1% a year early extra that you have to pay in. So it seems quite expensive. I've played with the calculators and I'm not sure it's as good as it sounds when you actually look at the numbers. Then, where are we? We're still good with time, Ellie, I hope. So the McLeod judgment. This is the age discrimination case. We're about 3 months on from the judgment now. And we've run through very quickly, admittedly, 3 different NHS pension schemes that currently exist. And most of you will have 2. You'll have your earliest version of the scheme and then the 2015 scheme that you were moved to, not through choice, but purely because of your age. As a result, it was deemed unlawful. And as a result of that case finally moving through to fruition, we now know that from April of next year, anyone that retires after that date, and I'm expecting all of you to fit into that bracket. I don't see anyone retiring before April of next year, so we're okay. You stop it. You will be given the opportunity to decide whether or not the 7-year period between April 2015 and essentially April 2022, which will be known as the remedy period, you'll be given the figures when you're retiring as to whether or not you align that service with your old 1995 or indeed 2008 schemes, or if you leave it within the 2015 scheme. And the expectation is whichever set of figures are larger, you'll choose that option. But it's up to you at retirement, not before. And you will be sent the calculations, assuming retirement is after April of next year. And despite everything that's been going on around this, that's the important point. Everything else is almost in the background. There are implications for how much you've grown the pension in recent years. So some of you may have incurred some of these annual charges. Well, that's going to be unravelled as well. It'll have impacts on how much your pot is worth at the other end in terms of the lifetime allowance. But much of that will start unravelling and make more sense over the next few years. So please log into your total reward statement. If it's not available, or if it is clearly showing errors, I will add a phone number, which is not mine. It's NHS Business Services Authority. And my suggestion to everyone in this meeting is that you look to access your online statements, whatever they may look like, and then you also call the number I've just input to ask for two things: a membership statement and an annual allowance growth statement. And the latter can be forwarded to your accountant. And and I read some of you are salaried and so on, but depending upon where you are, if you are a salaried GP, please make sure you are filling in your certificates of pensionable profits and they are being submitted each year, because if they're not, the information is not passing from you via PCSE, and not much passes through PCSE, to be fair, and it's not making it to Business Services Authority to calculate your pension benefits on a rolling basis. There is, but I can't remember that offhand, so I'll punch that in once I finish, if that's okay. I'll add the email address later. But that phone number is great. The website, when it works, is wonderful because it shows you your numbers. So I've got really good news. I have 2 more slides. That's it. And one is a compliance slide at the end, which you can choose to read or not. This is what I suggest in terms of financial planning for everyone. So I think we've covered the retirement planning. Not necessarily this is what you must do at retirement, but you've got the very best pension you can access. So just try and make sure you're aware of what it is and how it works. In terms of the rest of your planning, Claire mentioned earlier on income protection. Absolutely correct and valid point. But whether or not you need it depends upon your situation. And my suggestion here is that if you just look at the picture on screen, if you start at the bottom with protection, that could be anything as literal as make sure that if your income is important to you and your family, make sure it's protected. If you're a partner, check your partnership agreement, which probably runs up to 52 weeks in the event of absence. Thereafter would be dissolved. So after 52 weeks, potentially have 0 income or an ill health retirement pension at that point, but it will likely be quite modest because you're early on in your careers. In terms of additional protection, I can see at least one baby, and I know the whole reason for the course. So make sure that if you haven't already organised wills, you do. A will arguably will be the most important thing to take from this session. Not particularly exciting, not particularly pleasant because it's our own mortality. And the reason is not necessarily financial. It's purely to make sure that whomever you would like to look after your baby or your children is chosen and confirmed in your will. Because if not, potentially whoever shouts the loudest will look after your children. in the event of your demise, and you're not there to look after your children or defend how that is arranged. So a will sort that for you in advance. If you need names and numbers, I can give you names and numbers of solicitors who can draw that up, names and numbers of medical specialist accountants. I'm not paid by any of them. I just deal with only doctors, so I know good ones and I know less good ones, and I won't be giving you the less good ones. And then other things, if you have the likes of mortgages, maternity leave can impact. Certain lenders or lenders generally will want to clarify when you're going back and how your income will look when you go back. So borrowing money in advance of going on maternity leave can be quite good, but actually if you're going back part-time or to a more modest income, it might be a problem. So although it can be done, make sure any mortgage debt that you are secure is affordable. And make sure you keep reviewing your rates, because rates are staggeringly good at the moment. Fantastically good. Barclays are releasing, and they're a shambles in terms of administration. I think they're administered by PCSE, but they're releasing a 0.99% rate next week. That's unbelievably low. But there are lots of others that are out there that are wonderful. So just keep checking what you've got, compare it against the market, use a broker, and it doesn't have to be us, it can be anyone, but use a broker because they'll look at the market for you, do it for you. And it might be you're in the perfect place, or it may be they'll recommend someone else. In terms of savings, can I reverse the question? Does anyone have any negative savings? They'll typically be known as debts. But if you do, boring as this sounds, just write them down. Write them down in order, not of the debt amount, but of the interest rate amount. Because if you cover off and pay down the debt that you're charged the highest interest on and clear that first, everything else gets quicker and better for you. Typically, it's credit cards. And to give you an example, was a GP actually, my record, do not wave at the camera or cry at this point, £126,000 of credit cards. And his wife, and I'm not kidding, didn't know. Their lifestyle was staggeringly good, and I'll clarify that. The hedge down the pathway was perfect ball-shaped hedges all the way down both sides of the pathway, but they couldn't afford it. So he was just spending money on credit cards to fund a lifestyle. So please be careful, because he also had the highest interest rate, 34.9%. And we got there, but we had to write it down and we had to tackle it. So if you're in that bracket, text me, because you can be the new record holder. If not, just pay those debts down. And then a final one from me. Again, not particularly exciting, but tax. Make sure, particularly if you're transitioning from trainee to locum or partner, or you're a salaried GP and you're working locums or similar, if you can just make sure you keep records of your income, and it sounds obvious, and the locum sites now are great on that, but do not fall foul of earning more and spending more until you know your tax liabilities. So if you don't have a specialist accountant, I mentioned it earlier on, but please let me know, or let Ellie know, and I can forward some names and numbers to Ellie. A specialist accountant will be able to predict if your earnings are X, your tax bill in January and July will be X and Y. And that means you save towards that and you know where you are. What you do not want to do is fall behind with that, because revenue and customs do not soften their stance. They may give you time to pay it, but they expect it to be paid. And just being ahead of that curve, which is particularly difficult for locums, come across that quite regularly. So you start chasing your tail to pay a tax bill, so you work more, which means you then owe more tax at the next bill, and so on. So just try and do things in advance if possible, and it'll work in your favour. Ellie, I think we're perfectly on schedule.
I think you have done a wonderful job, and that was so useful, Paul. And there's quite a few comments and questions in the chat actually for you. I don't know if you're able to, right. Maybe some of those might need answering by writing rather than speaking to them.
Okay, I shall type in a few things if that's okay.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. Really, really useful. And I'm going to hand over to Camille if she is ready. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, and thanks Paul and the previous speakers as well. Really useful info. So I am going to talk to you about appraisal and revalidation. And I am a new appraiser. I did do some appraisals just before the pandemic. Now I think I've got the window open with Paul's things. I don't know what I've done. Okay, that's better. Okay, so yeah, normally when people talk in professional circles about appraisal, that there's a lot of dread and boredom. And my hope for you with this talk is that you I'm hoping that it will make it a bit more light. I want to show you that it doesn't have to be a burden. That's not to minimize what's happened this year, what a year it's been, but also for you, for whatever reason, whatever life changes you've had that have led you to this talk, for example, maternity or working abroad or sickness. One of the punctuating themes this year has also been fake news. So what I'd like you to do, and I appreciate there aren't that many people here, but I need you to do this so that my presentation works, is go to menti.com and use the code 833 30060. And that would really help me because the slides won't move on unless people answer the questions. So the first question is whether you can identify some fake news. The options are: the appraisal must take place at your practice, you have to choose dates and times from what your appraiser offers, you can do it on FaceTime, you can do it at Costa. Okay, so the correct answer is you can do your appraisal on FaceTime. That's not ideal, I wouldn't recommend it, but technically you can use any online platform you choose, but you need to be careful about confidentiality. And that's the same reason why you can't do your appraisal from a coffee shop. However, there is no rule about where the appraisal must take place. It doesn't have to be at your practice. It could be at your appraiser's practice, or it could be at your appraiser's home. But it needs to be at a place that's confidential and people aren't going to be disturbing you. So I've seen people in the past, pre-pandemic, doing it at RCGP, for example. And you don't have to choose dates and times from what your appraiser offers. We really want to emphasize that it's a joint decision and you should feel empowered to ask for a time and date that suits you as well. So you do it together as you would have a professional conversation. Okay, so next question. So we've had elections over the last year, so this is about points. So do you need 50 CPD points per year? Is the required CPD in proportion to how much you're working? You can include something you learned on your leave in CPD, personal learning. Excellent. Everyone knows this one. So yeah, some people sometimes think that you need 50 CPD points per year, and that's a myth. That used to be what we aimed for, to kind of make a approximation of 250 over 5 years. However, as I'm about to tell you, it's made really clear now that you don't need to have 50 CPD points per year. And you need to do all the CPD even if you work one session a year. So regardless of how much you work as a GP, you're going to have to do at least the same amount of CPD, the basic CPD. So this is a bit of good news after all the fake news and the bad news. This is Appraisal 2020, and it was a way to try and recognise that doctors are busy and dealing with the pandemic, and let's just get down to the key things that we need in appraisal. So there's no set number of hours or entries. You just put things in if they're useful for you. The discussion is a really important part, and the idea of the discussion is to support your well-being, but also to kind of give you a space to debrief. The main message here is quality over quantity. So what do you have to put in your appraisal for Appraisal 2020? You need to include your scope of practice. So you need to clearly explain which things you're doing. It doesn't have to just be your NHS work. It doesn't just have to be clinical work. So anything that requires a license to practice. Your PDP, so your personal development plan. Your achievements, challenges, and aspirations. And as an appraiser, I actually really enjoy this section. I like to know that, you know, that someone's had a baby, or you know, they're having challenges with their family, because it kind of puts things into context. And it's really great to have the aspirations, because then we can sort of support in thinking around how to achieve those. Your CPD, your quality improvement activity, any significant event analysis or untoward events if you're named in them. Learning events or complaints, again, if you're named in them. Although some people do include complaints, for example, if they are the complaints lead for their practice, so they weren't directly named in them, but they help to deal with them. Compliments and your 360 feedback, your patient feedback, if it's available, if you have it that year. So we've got another question. This one is, you must complete one of your own clinical audits or QI projects in the 5-year cycle, at least. But I get a lot of different ideas around this. Yeah, okay, so one person here knows the answer is false, and the other person might have just been playing with me but said QI but not audit. Yeah, that's fair. I mean, that some people do think that. But the thing is that you don't actually have to do it yourself. So it was a little bit of a tricky question, because I said at least one of your own. You don't have to run the whole thing yourself. And it doesn't even have to be a traditional QI project in the strictest form. Basically, it counts if you have reviewed your care in the context of guidance, made changes where necessary to improve the quality of care you provide, and revisited the question to see if the changes made an improvement. So that's actually much broader than audits and QI projects. So some things that other people have done are reflective case reviews, learning event analyses, review of personal outcome data. So for example, you can see your cancer referral, well, you can kind of see it at practice level, but for some reason at one point I received something personal, so I just used that. Plan, do, study, act cycle, so like partial QI. So these are ways of fulfilling that QI requirement without doing an onerous project. And you know, we just want you to do something useful rather than you know, doing a massive project just for the sake of showing. So you know, if you want to do a massive project and you have the time for that, fair enough, but I think most people don't. So this is the last question, I think. It's on revalidation. Revalidation can take place if you have less than 5 appraisals, or the appraiser decides if you are fit for revalidation. Thank you. Okay, so yes, you are all excellent and you know your stuff. You don't need to have all 5 appraisals, and I think you know that because you're on mat leave or you're thinking about mat leave, and you know that you can still get revalidated while you're on mat leave even if you don't have an appraisal. I had one friend who told me just before this talk that, you know, she actually had all her appraisals. like even during mat leave. She really didn't take much mat leave, but I said to her, I'm sure you must be in the minority, but she said no. But there is an option for early appraisal. So if you do have to miss an appraisal due to a significant period out of work, the RCGP recommend that you have an early appraisal following your return, and this will give you an opportunity to reflect on everything that you experienced and to plan any changes that you want to make. And a really important part of the early appraisal is that you make your PDP, you make a new PDP that's actually relevant, because your previous PDP is probably not relevant to your new life. I kind of wish that one of my appraisees did this, because his PDP was like, 3 years out. So, there wasn't anything about the pandemic. There wasn't anything about his changed circumstances, and it didn't really make much sense to talk about his old PDP. Yeah, so that's that. I can't actually see the full chat and everything at the moment, but I saw something flash up about asking whether the 2021 is here to stay. We don't know the official answer to that yet, but you can use the 2021 this year. So even though it's 2021, you can still use 2020.
Yeah, there was another question, sorry, Camille, about whether you can choose which platform you use to document appraisal.
Absolutely, yeah. So I'm one of these strange people who doesn't use any of the famous platforms. I use GP Tools, and I just use it because I like to support the underdog, but also they're really simple to use and they do all the things that the others do. I have no kind of affiliation with them. I'm not advertising. It's just, and also they charge less than the other ones, and they don't charge for the questionnaires. But the common ones are Clarity, which everyone's heard of, and 14 Fish, which I think everyone is hearing of because trainees have moved to it. And then there's also the MAG form, so you can actually do it without paying for anything. But that's really it's really literally a form, and you have to upload it. And you have to add things manually. But some people don't find that difficult. Some people find that quite straightforward. The thing about all these platforms is they really do the same thing, just with different formats. Yeah, so that's my my take on that. You can use what you want. Some people would argue that maybe it makes it a bit harder to find an appraiser if you use a random one, but most, at least, I don't know, Claire might correct me, but I think most appraisers would be happy to learn a new platform. There are not that many platforms, and they're not that difficult either. And I've not had any problems with getting appraisers with my sort of decisions to use something different. But yeah, that's fine. Does that answer the questions?
So Camille, I would agree with you that appraisers should accept different platforms, and I would also agree with everything you've said about empowerment and it being a professional conversation. So I've been involved in workshops where people have talked about feeling quite threatened, and I almost the word bullied by appraisers, not you, obviously. And I think it is really important that it's supposed to be for you. I was going to ask you about MSF and PSQ platforms and forms and what you've got to say about that.
Yeah, I haven't included any slides on that, but each platform has a different way of doing those. They're linked to sort of GMC recommendations, so that you can do them without picking the patients or without sort of influencing in that way, in theory. So you can it can be linked to your platform, or there are some companies that offer separate from the platforms, but I've never seen anyone use that. But yeah,
you just have to be a bit careful in that whoever the lead is in your area may have some rules, and almost certainly if you found a good one that because there are some really good leadership ones, it's probably even better than what's on the platforms, but you do need to ask in advance so you get permission to use it. Was why I was flagging it. So again, the responsible officer will almost certainly say yes, but it's much easier to ask in advance. So if somebody is doing a leadership course or a teaching course and they want to do something about that, just message through to your appraisal team.
That's really helpful, Claire. I didn't realise about that at all. I have actually done the leadership one, but I did it in addition to the one that I'd already done. So maybe I made more work for myself, and we definitely don't want to make more work for people. So, and this slide is just a summary of what revalidation is. I think it's been up long enough, so if you wanted to read it, it's there. But I just wanted to say that think of revalidation as a sort of think in advance, like be prepared for it. So don't leave it till the last minute. You really should have your last appraisal at least 2 months before your revalidation date. As an appraiser, like this stuff gets me anxious if my things are getting delayed, and then we might end up having to delay the revalidation. That's you don't need to go through all that. Like just get it done in time so that you're ready. And for most people, it just happens automatically. You don't even need to think about it. You just get a random email one day saying you've been revalidated. But you do need to have an appraisal within a year of your revalidation date. So like the first thing I do when I get a new appraisee is I look at their revalidation date, because that tells me then what I need to get them to do before they, so that they can be ready for revalidation. And I'd say maybe like at least by maybe even the third appraisal, like you really should be thinking about whether you're revalidation ready, just to save you angst afterwards. Yeah, okay. So that was all the kind of main stuff, but going back to kind of my hope for you guys at the beginning, like I want you to see appraisal as a breathing space, an opportunity for professional conversation with someone who's outside your work, and maybe even career development. I mean, that's what I've experienced, and that's kind of why I valued it. But I know that not everyone has experienced that. So I want to kind of shift it towards this kind of experience. And I know some of that depends on your situation and your appraiser, but I think it also depends on us as individuals, like to see it as a useful thing and try and go with that mindset. So how do we make it useful? How can we make it useful? Well, don't make it a chore. Different people are different. Some people like to just do a little bit as they go along, and that avoids it being heavy for them. And some of us just find it easier to do things last minute. But just know yourself, know what works for you, and then don't make it a chore beyond your own style. Appraisers are trained in coaching techniques, so use it. You're basically getting a bit of free coaching. You can be creative about your CPD. You've probably heard of people who like put books that they've read for fun in their appraisal, or even like making one of your PDP points around well-being and being really specific about it, so it's a proper PDP item, but like something that you really do need to do and you are going to do. Put that sort of thing in, make it kind of fit with what you are going to do, and try and well, I've kind of said that, try and sort of think about work-life balance and use it to develop your career. So my first appraiser was someone who's really inspiring. He was known in the national media, and I basically just used it as a chance to get to talk to a really interesting person. Although, because it was an appraisal, I didn't really get to ask him questions. It was more him asking me. But I just felt really glad to kind of get this expertise around me and get someone like that sort of helping. And each appraiser will have their own sort of thing, so you can kind of tap into things and use it as a career development tool. These are some really useful resources. I haven't just put them because they're references. I've put them because I genuinely find them helpful. So the RCGP First 5 library, I've made a short link to it. It's so good for everything being a First 5. So if you're new to the profession, but even if you're not a First 5, even if you're not in your first 5 years, there's some really useful links there. And that also links to appraisals and tips for appraisals. And then the next RCGP item is the Mythbusters, which is what I took a lot of the information from for these slides. And I really like them because they kind of break all your myths about appraisal. And then these two links are always on appraisers' slides, and I think they're really useful because they're relevant to what's going on now with COVID, and kind of say to you that, about the appraisal 2020 and how long it's going to last, which we don't know properly yet. And the GMC website, obviously, and also each other, amongst us as professionals. So, at any, your peers, like, people have gone through things, they know about stuff. So, like for me, I talked to Georgie, who I think is on your cohort, about this, because, there were things that, I wouldn't know to talk about if I didn't hear it from you guys. So thanks, Georgie. And that's it.
Thank you so much, Camille. And I think Kate asked in the chat where a good place to get a summary of requirements with the changes are, but I'm assuming that probably that's answered in your last slide with the links, what the new 2020 requirements are.
Yeah, absolutely. And the slide after the Appraisal 2020 sort of summarised that, but I think you're going to get a copy of all these slides.
Yeah.
And the links, you can use the links to see it firsthand yourself as well.
Yeah. That's great, thank you. And just to add from my experience, I found I'm on Use Clarity, but I actually found them quite helpful when I had questions about. I phoned them up and I got through to someone very quickly and asked them about how to get feedback. So that was another resource.
That's a really good idea. Yeah, just use anyone that you can. And absolutely, I found the GP Tools appraisal, the people, it's actually run by GPs, and they literally would write back to me in 10 minutes. And I'd be like, how did you do that? But then, yeah, there's just answer straight away.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your knowledge. Really appreciate it. And I'm sure the slides will be really useful, which we will send out as a pack to everybody. And we're going to move on now. I'm going to welcome Celia Dawson to talk about the GP retainer scheme. Thank you so much, Celia, for joining us. Are you happy to share your own slides?
Yep, I'll share my own slides. Are you happy to monitor the chat for now?
Yes,
and then we can pick that up afterwards?
Perfect, thank you.
So afternoon, everybody. I'm Celia Dawson. I'm a GP and a GP educator. It would be interesting for me if those of you who are perinatal participants could just write on the chat which schemes you've been on as trainees or are still on. The reason I ask is that the slides that I'm going to use I presented some of the Northwest London schemes. So if you've all seen it before, then I'll obviously edit how much I talk to the slides and how much I take your Q&As. So if you could all just stick on which scheme you are for me, that would be incredibly helpful. Meanwhile, I'll upload the slides, and Ellie, if you could tell me when you could see them, please.
Will do.
Thank you.
And Celia, Harriet trained at King's VTS.
Great.
So I don't think she'll have seen your slides. And we can see your slides, that's brilliant.
Are they filling the whole screen?
Yes.
Brilliant.
Good.
So I'll just wait and see where the rest of you, which schemes you're on, if that's okay, because I think we're doing okay for time. My slides will take 5 or 10 minutes at the most, and then we'll have plenty of time for questions. I do understand that there may be some private things which you prefer to discuss offline, and that's absolutely fine. We can do that. So we've got Harriet, who was at King's. Has anybody else told us, Ellie?
I think not yet. But I think I would just go for it, Celia.
Okay, I'll go for it. So the role that I'm talking from today is that I am the GP retainer lead for London. So the scheme is actually officially called the retention scheme, but I think most of us still know of it as the GP retainer scheme. Some of the slides that I'm presenting are Celia slides, and some of them are copy and pasted from the national guidance, and I will provide links to relevant bits of national guidance when it's relevant. So the ethos of the scheme, as I see it, is to support valued GPs to be retained in the NHS workforce in educationally supported setting with flexible, protected hours. So the important bits of this are GP, NHS, educationally supported, and the flexible, protected hours. And I think that that's something which will appeal and be relevant to all of you at this stage in your lives. It's relevant to lots of other people as well, but I think it's particularly relevant to you guys at the moment. In terms of who is eligible for it, there are 3 eligibility criteria that you all have to fulfill to be eligible to apply for the scheme. So you have to be seriously considering leaving or have already left general practice. Now that may be that you actually haven't done a job since CCT, or it may be that you haven't done any work since before you went on maternity leave, or it may be that you haven't done any work for a period of time, or it may be that you're thinking of leaving forever. You don't really have to provide any proof of it, but you do have to make the statement that you consider yourself at risk of leaving general practice, NHS general practice. You could be approaching retirement. It's probably not relevant to most of the participants here, but it is relevant to some of the presenters who I know are here. Hello, Claire and I. You need to show that a regular part-time role does not meet the doctor's need for flexibility. So the session, if you're on the GP retainer scheme, is 4 hours and 10 minutes. And it really is supposed to be 4 hours and 10 minutes, which is made up typically of 3 hours of clinical time and an hour or so to do your admin, a visit potentially. And each month you get 2 hours of mentoring with your educational supervisor. That's in addition to your study leave and annual leave. You also have the opportunity to annualise your hours. And for you with children, then sometimes that's something that's very attractive, particularly when they get to school age. So it means that you could work for 30 weeks of the year and just work harder in those 30 weeks, and then have the rest of the year not just as annual leave and study leave, but the annualised component. So you're working for fewer weeks of the year to accommodate school holidays. Sometimes people at my end of the career spectrum choose to annualise their hours so that they can flit off with their husband for 3 months of the year, which is very appealing, I must say. So it does work at that end of the spectrum as well. The third thing that you need to declare to be eligible is that you've got a need for additional educational supervision. So for newly qualified doctors, that may be that you're at work or you're at home being a hectic mum and wife or daughter. So you really haven't got the time to sort of put in CPD hours outside of your working life. At my end of the spectrum, we may be caring for an elderly relative, as of course you may be, or for a husband or for a partner. And it's important that when we apply for the scheme that we're saying why we think we need additional educational supervision. Currently, I would say that the commonest thing that people say is that their education and training has been impacted by COVID. So there are some people who perhaps have been shielding or working remotely for a significant amount of time, and they feel that they've missed out on some component of their learning and really feel that they continue to need support in their working life. So if you feel that you meet those 3 eligibility criteria, then the process is that you find a practice and an educational supervisor. Now, you might be staying in your training practice, or you might be looking for a new practice. Unfortunately, at the moment, we don't have a matching process. So it's not like when you're a trainee that we can say you're allocated to XYZ practice. We have asked the national team if there could be a list of potential practices or interested practices, and that is something that they're working on. But I'm afraid that at the moment the onus is on you to find a practice. You may do that by contacting the one that's round the corner. You may know of a practice that's supportive. You may know of a practice because you know some of the colleagues who were working there. I also say to people, you could look on NHS jobs and consider contacting practice that are advertising for a salaried doctor and say, would they be interested in a retainer doctor? I've also been told that sometimes the LMC are aware of practices that are looking for GPs, so that might be another way. Your educational supervisor, unlike when you're a GP trainee, doesn't have to be a GP trainer. They need to be someone with educator experience. So they might be a GP trainer, they might be a foundation supervisor, they might be an undergraduate teacher, they might be an experienced appraiser. And if you're not sure, these are the sorts of things that you would ask me whether they were eligible. If you think you are interested and if you might be eligible, or if you're not sure, feel free to contact me personally on the email address that I've written on the slide. I can usually respond within a few days. Don't feel that you have to go through the generic GP retainer email. It just adds another bit to the loop, as it were. Feel free to contact me. I'm happy to talk through eligibility. I'm happy to look at a draft application form. I'm happy to discuss whether your supervisor might be appropriate or not. The application form is on the link that I've attached. It's also on the London Deanery website, as was. And if you're going to have a conversation with me, it's really useful if you've had a bash at filling it in. It gives us something to talk around, particularly around the timetabling, and then I can help you edit it and deal with any potential gaps that are there. Once we've had a conversation and assuming that you're eligible, I then speak to your educational supervisor, and that's around checking that they understand that it must be the NHS contracts that they use with you, that you should get the contract CPD, which is generous. So if it's a 4-session that you're going to work, and you can do 1 to 4 sessions, then you get 22 sessions of CPD of 4 hours 10 minutes each, plus your mentoring of 2 hours per month. So you get a lot of educational input. Once I've signed off the form, we send it to NHS England, and ultimately it's them that hold the cash. So it's them that made the final decision as to whether they will approve you as a GP retainer. They typically take about 4 weeks to turn it around, and the funding is now held locally rather than nationally. The practice benefits from having you, just not from having you as a GP working there, but they also get some money per session per week. So currently £76.92 per session per week. They pay your salary and you negotiate the salary amount with your practice. There isn't a set amount for that. And you can also claim a retainer bursary, which is £1,000 to £4,000 per year, depending on whether you're working 1, 2, 3 or 4 sessions. Once you're approved, you and I then have a chat annually. You fill in just part of the form again so that we can see how you're developing, checking that you're eligible, and hopefully ironing out any issues. I've already mentioned the contract. There's nothing new on that slide that I haven't already mentioned, but it's there summarised. These 2 links are the most useful for you. So one of them has very detailed guidance, which is useful for not just you, but also useful for your practices, who will ask questions about the contract, ask questions about your CPD, etc., etc. Then the second link is a very useful frequently asked questions. And typically, if you ask me a question, I will send you these links as well, because it typically has most of the answers. That's the end of my slides, and I'm aware that there's quite a small number of us here today, so I'm very happy to take personal questions, but I do completely understand if you don't want to ask questions in this kind of setting, and that you'd rather contact me privately afterwards on the email, and then we can arrange to speak. But very happy to take any questions live now if anybody's got them, and if Ellie's happy with my timekeeping.
I'm very happy, Celia. I've got an echo. Can anyone else hear that? I don't know why. Sorry about that. Yeah, no, that was so helpful, Celia. And thank you so kind of you to share your personal email as well. I had a question actually around, are there any perceived disadvantages to practices with the retainer scheme? I'm just wondering if you were trying to negotiate with a practice, what barriers there might be.
So I guess if you've got a practice who is undergoing huge amounts of change, then they are taking you on as an employee. So you gain the same employment rights that you would if you were a salaried doctor. So I think it's, and do correct me, either of you if you think I'm wrong, I think it's 2 years when you gain full employment rights. And typically people stay on the scheme for up to 5 years. So practices who know that they're in a huge state of change may be slightly fearful of that. But typically practices see it as a huge positive. Claire, I don't know if you want to disagree.
No, so Celia's my boss. I'm actually a retainer under Celia. It has been transformative for me. In fact, interestingly, I did it because I was caring for a relative, and in the first year when I needed it most, I was actually too tired and too stressed to apply for it. But the practice was very supportive, and actually one of the things we did was we had that grown-up professional conversation, a bit like Camille was talking about earlier. We had a conversation about money and did all sorts of playing around with money actually, and worked out what the practice was gaining and what seemed to be fair. And actually I am paid something that feels appropriate to the level of expertise and skills I bring to the practice. But it is about negotiation, and it is in some ways easier when you're 60 to have those negotiations because you've got those skills. But actually, as a young GP with a family, you bring things in as well. And I think it's that bit of give and take. What does the practice really need, and what do you really need? And if you need to be able to go and do a school pickup every day, what can you give back to the practice in return? And if you start doing that, so my practice is desperate for people between 4 and 8 in the evening. And that's really difficult if you've got a small child in tow, but maybe you could negotiate 2 days of finishing at 2 o'clock and then do one really long day, not necessarily on the retainer scheme, but on anything. And actually you're going to get paid, nearly 4 days worth of money for 3 days, and you've given the practice a gift of one totally committed, long, busy day. It's those sorts of bits of give and take.
Someone's asked a question about salary, and salary is very variable. And the reason it's very variable is that, so say I was having a conversation with Ellie who wanted to be a retainer, then her timetable may say that in her 4 hours and 10 minutes, she's only actually going to see or deal with 6 patients because she feels at this moment that she needs really long appointments because of whatever's going on in her life. Whereas Camille may feel completely comfortable to deal with 20 patients. Now, obviously, a practice will pay according to what they think that you are bringing to them. And if it is that Ellie is dealing with incredibly complex, frail patients, then she may get paid the same. But when I have the conversation with you, when you potentially apply, Claire will know that I'm quite clear that you need to be very, very specific on your application and your timetabling about what you're going to do, because it's much harder to backtrack and negotiate after the event. We need it sort of mainly agreed and boundaried at the beginning. And I quite often have the conversation with applicants about, okay, this is what it says on the timetable. Are you going to stick to that? Because typically, as doctors, we're very driven, we have a very dedicated work ethic, and it's not that the practice expect more, it's what we expect of ourselves. So I try and sort of guide you to getting it really tight at the time of application, and that's also why I always speak to the educational supervisor as well. Sorry, Claire. Claire says I was very strict with her. I am quite strict because I think it's really important to get it right at the beginning in terms of looking after you. There's no point being on the scheme if you're still going to be there for 7 hours and you're still going to miss school pickup or mum's appointment. You're sweet.
Thank you, Celia. I don't know if there's any more questions, but we can always put those in the chat perhaps if they come up, if there's nothing else immediate. And I'm delighted. Oh, Camille, please go ahead.
I didn't realise that I had actually clicked it. I was hovering. But I am wondering a little bit about the sort of non-maternity reasons, if like how much success there is with those, like looking after parents and that kind of thing. I don't know. I guess because it's not something I hear about that much, and I wonder if there are any different tips around that. If we have time, it's not important otherwise.
Is that all right, Ellie, if I take that question?
Yeah, maybe
for
1 minute.
Historically, it was very much around people who'd been on parental leave. There was a big change a few years ago, I think it was 2016, when they opened up the eligibility to saying that you could be a portfolio doctor, you could be approaching retirement. So I've got, I reckon, at least a third now of the 90 odd retainers in London are people who are either portfolio doctors or doctors with ill health or caring responsibilities at my end of the career spectrum. So yeah, the numbers are very significant and we have great success at getting people approved. And I will help you edit the application form if it doesn't look quite right, but I feel that you're entirely eligible. I see that as part of my role.
Thanks, that's really good to hear.
Thank you so much. I think we'll, if it's okay, we'll move on to Claire, who I'm delighted to welcome. Thank you, Celia. That was brilliant. And over to you, Claire, to Primary Care Dean for HEE. I'm going to share lots of interesting things.
Okay, so if you could watch my timing, Ellie, because I'm happy to kind of finish early. So I said to Ellie, I'd just pick up that anything that anybody else didn't talk about, and that I would skip over things if they'd already been covered. And I think, you know, the others have said as well, these are really tough times. I found having a small baby and being on maternity leave really, really difficult, and I didn't do that during COVID. So I think anybody who has done that and survived that, a pregnancy on their own, a delivery on their own, dealing with children in the middle of being shut down, I think you actually deserve medals. So I have put up some references. The BMA people did talk about some medicines, so some references, but I have just put up a few things. So obviously the BMA work, but there's a really good website about childcare. And I've put up some things. So ACAS actually talks about the sorts of things it's reasonable to ask the practice to think about before you come back. It's actually, you're entitled to a risk assessment. That was in Claire's slides, and that risk assessment in the past would have been, is there somewhere where I can go and express breast milk? But actually the risk assessment now is that you may have gone off on maternity leave before lockdown and you are coming back to a word that's totally different, and that risk assessment includes all the sort of learning that you need to do about that. And I've put up a link to Mind as well, which also gives quite a lot of advice about the workplace and coronavirus.
Claire, are you going to share your slides?
I will. Oh, are they not sharing? I'm so sorry. It said they were. We'll try again. I'm really, really sorry. I even had pretty pictures.
We will anticipate them. There we go.
So let me, hang on. Can you see? So you can see them now?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So Claire mentioned kit days and split days, which are the shared parental leave days, and your annual leave accrues as well. So you've got a real opportunity, I think, to think creatively. So as well as that risk assessment, there's that bit about the flexible working request, and practices are obliged to really properly listen to your request. And so if you ask something that is reasonable, as long as it fits in with their needs of the business as a whole, they shouldn't really be saying no to you. And that's that bit I was talking about earlier on, about working out, well, if there's a couple of days where you really can't work much of the day, can you give something back in lieu, and having that negotiation. But also, if you've got kit days and annual leave, push a bit for a proper induction. Maybe there's somebody that you can buddy with. I think it. So I worked from home for 3 months during lockdown because my mum was very sick, and I actually found going back into the practice really scary, because we still hadn't really sorted out. We hadn't been vaccinated. My husband has medical problems, which meant I was scared about going back. And then on top of that, all the processes had changed and I didn't really know what to do. And so actually the practice was very kind, and I had a couple of days where I went in just for a couple of hours to see what this horrible one-way system, masks and aprons and things looked like, and it really made a big difference. I'm now failing to move my slides along. I'm just going to and I think the BMA and Paul talked enough about money. I think that the point that I had kids was where I went off and got an accountant, because, I mean, to be honest, the first year I had an accountant, they saved me more money than they cost me. And the points that Claire made about lots of the defence unions and the BMA, the GMC, the RCGP, everybody will actually give you reduced rates while you're on maternity leave and you're part-time. There's all sorts of complications with child benefit, and you've got issues to do with tax with it, and that you're entitled to some tax-free childcare. There's all sorts of things that's worth asking about. I'm a bit obsessed with well-being. I think it's always been important, but this year it's probably been more important than anything. It's not embarrassing to get yourself a mentor or get yourself a coach or join a support group. In London, we have training hubs per borough, and the training hubs have access to all sorts of resources that you could use. Camille mentioned the First Five toolkit for appraisal, but actually First Five and the local First Five groups can be really, really supportive. It's also not shaming to need the Practitioner Health Programme. The Practitioner Health Programme is there to support the mental health and well-being of doctors, and it's not there for when you have an acute psychotic illness because you've worked too hard. It's actually there for if you're feeling a bit stressed and hassled and you want to do something to stop yourself being sick. I won't do induction and refresher and things because Celia's covered that sort of thing. Ellie asked me about ways of working, and there's lots of things we can do. So you can be a partner, you can be a locum, but you can be a locum in all sorts of ways. So you can do long locums, you can pick 2 or 3 practices to do regular locum sessions at. Some areas have locum chambers. There's a big NHSE programme being pushed through at the minute, trying to persuade local areas to have sort of borough level locum banks. And again, either your primary care network or your training hub will know if that sort of thing is coming through. So as a London GP, I know that there's money coming through this year for a digital locum platform. And so you should find that your borough has access to one and that there may be work available for that. COVID has done all sorts of things to what we can do in out of hours, and you can do NHS type out of hours and digital work. You can do that privately, but also you can do quite a lot of that in a blended way, in that some of the companies that offer those sorts of digital appointments are commissioned by the NHS in some areas. And that sort of thing, being able to work from home, yes, you still need childcare, because it's, if you're being a professional, having your baby crawl all over your complex consultation with somebody, a patient, is not reasonable, but it does suddenly open up things that you can do. Some of you, I don't know if either of you and anybody then in the audience watching the recording know about fellowships. So anybody who is newly qualified is entitled to 2 years of a supported GP fellowship. So those are paid for by NHSE, but you'll see the words SPIN, and in London you'll see HEE academic. And you'll also see the training hubs and primary care networks trying to be quite clever and helping set up some sort of quality activity for the PCN or wider for the ICS. And so one of the things to do is, if there's something you might be interested in doing, think about it and approach your PCN lead or approach your training hub, because they might be able to actually get you half a day a week to do that in, tied in with you working as a salary doctor somewhere. Education, there's loads of roles you can have as an educator. Your practice might be interested in you being a clinical supervisor, and you can be a clinical supervisor to GP trainees, foundation doctors, medical students, paramedics, physician associates, pharmacists. If you're a bit further on in years in practice, you can become an educational supervisor and then a trainer. A lot of the medical schools and HEIs are looking for people. So if you live in Northwest London, Brunel is just opening up a medical school and is looking for people. In the big medical schools are always looking for people to take on medical students. And again, you can have a conversation with your practice as to whether you do that as part of your employment or whether you take the money from the medical school and ask them for access to rooms. Camille talked about being an appraiser. There are opportunities in London as well for becoming a mentor. And one of the things I've learned over my career is that working full time as a clinician is really hard. Having stuff that breaks up your week a bit is really helpful. Now, it may be But at the moment, being a mum or being a carer is more than enough. And I think the other thing I've learned is that you don't have to do it all at once. It really doesn't matter if you spend 5 years or 10 years being a fabulous mum and a GP, and that's you don't do any top-ups and glorified extras. But then as opportunities come up, as life maybe gets a bit easier, taking on bits and pieces, and that's a list of other sorts of bits and pieces that I thought you might be able to go on with. Camille's talked a bit about keeping up to date. And again, it's these ideas about how you can use what you do in the practice every day to fill up your appraisal so that it's not a great hassle at the end of the year. So I think she talked about using the cancer audit. If you said to your practice that you'd be happy to look at some of the cancer cases in the cancer audit, it's really interesting, really fascinating to go back through the notes and look how that diagnosis was made. And in the modern world, again, you can probably have access to the computer and the practice records at home. It doesn't have to be something you trek into the practice for. You can offer to present a significant event or a complaint or a compliment. You can offer to help with a cancer audit. If you set up a WhatsApp group in your practice or an email learning group, you can, if you anonymize it, cut and paste some stuff to there, and then you're not paying to go on courses, you're doing it all of the time. And you'll get sent this, but I've just put up some of the sorts of resources that people use. And if we'd had a bigger audience, I would have suggested that the rest of you put your ideas in the chat. But there's lots and lots of stuff that's free. At the moment, because of all the work that's been done trying to persuade GPs to stay on and trying to upskill the rest of the system, there's lots of stuff that's being paid for. So I did a red whale cancer course that was paid for by the training hub. The locally Red Whale have, that some of the training hubs have paid for them to do those update days. The one down at the bottom, Future Learn, has free courses, and I've just done a really interesting one on social storytelling and social activism, which actually was so different from being at the surgery. I found it really helpful. You're early on in your career. If you do some stuff for the practice, get it published somewhere so you can shove it on your CV. It's really easy to put stuff on BMJ Bright Ideas or the University of Fab Stuff. Innovate's always looking for first 5 stories. If you write to one of the GP ragmags, if you've done something in your practice, they'll often give you a couple of columns. And then you've got that in your CV, so that if an education opportunity comes up, you've got something on your CV that you can then use to talk about if you get an interview or if you've got an application form to fill in. So that is the end of my slides. So hopefully I can stop sharing. And does that leave us some time for some questions, Ellie?
Yeah, it does. And I've got a couple of slides to finish off with, if there aren't any, but that was so interesting. Thank you, Claire. I've got some ideas for myself from listening to that.
Hot to be a baby today.
Yeah.
Can I ask, that was really useful, Claire, and it was helpful to hear that, I don't have to do it all now, and I can, get into other things in a few years' time. But I just wanted some sort of tips about, because I've just moved to a different area, about getting involved with like more different portfolio roles in the new area.
So where's your new area?
So I've actually moved to Suffolk, so I'm not in London anymore.
Right, so Suffolk has got training hubs. You need to find out who runs your local training hub. So HEE and NHSE work with the training hubs, and so you're Kent, Surrey and Sussex, aren't you? So they've got a really active programme of education going. They're the people who deal with the fellowships. They're also the people who have communications with the primary care networks, and this idea about maybe there's some work that you can do for them that isn't a whole year worth of study, but is some paid sessions to do a particular project. Your baby's really little. enjoy her. There's money for mentoring at the moment as well. So NHSE is paying to match up young doctors with, I hope we've managed to push for them not all to be old doctors, but to push with to have some paid mentoring sessions with doctors a bit older than them in your area. And so you would then have somebody who knows what your local area is. Camille, have you got stuff to add on that?
I was just going to add, while she's thinking, that in the new climate, you might not even be limited to Suffolk, because you can actually, do things remotely. So even opportunities that you have through contacts in London. And in fact, funnily enough, I think I've got a contact for you in Suffolk, because I spoke to him about maternity work. So I'll try and dig that out for you, Harriet, and I can send that on.
And if you're into writing, you can't earn a fortune from writing, but actually if you do odd bits like contact Innovate and say, would you like a piece on returning from maternity leave during COVID? If you get that in there, you often find that you can use that to then pick up a paid writing job when the RCGP wants somebody to write an e-learning module, or you, as I say, contacting the RAGMAGs. BMJ Learning. I got some jobs from the BMJ Learning because I met somebody in the courtyard in the BMA at a Empowering Women session. It's that bit about taking an opportunity and then using it to move on to the next connection.
Camille, did you want to add something?
No, I was just smiling away because I think they're just all really good tips. I guess you can sign up to things like, so I didn't realise this until maybe last year, but you can sign up to RCGP jobs, and there's actually a section for RCGP jobs, like jobs with them. And that's now I keep getting the alerts about all the random short-term educational stuff, and like it's really flexible. So like this year, when there was really little work, I was really fortunate to get to teach pharmacists, which I just wouldn't have heard about if I didn't sign up to that. So I think signing up to lists, but I think the key point for me from Claire was like, just don't do it all at once, like concentrate on your family when you need to.
Well, especially if you've got to work till you're 78 or whatever it is.
A long time.
That's brilliant. I think so we've got just the last few minutes, unless there's any more questions from anyone else. I've got like 5 slides just to kind of round up. So I'm going to share those if I can figure it out. No. Is that sharing?
Yeah.
Is it as a slideshow?
When you press the button, I think it will be, so we can see the slides and the ones. Yeah, if you press from beginning now, you should.
Sorry, I thought I'd press that. Thank you. So just really quickly, I just was reflecting in preparing for this that I'm in terms of following on from Claire's intro about portfolio careers, how even the fact that I'm hosting this has really been just how your career journey kind of evolves rather than needing to feel like you have to plan it. And so I am I've got lots of different roles and hats, and one of them is as a champion for Northwest London for the supported return to training scheme. And the reason I've got this role is because I had a friend at VTS who was Claire's trainee, actually, who thought I'd be good to work alongside her with the training hub in Hammersmith and Fulham. So I started doing that when I first qualified. And that led me to do one of the fellowships that Claire mentioned. And I did that at a clinical fellowship in health and wellbeing. And that led me to understand that one of my core values for life, but also within my work, is this concept of integration, which I'm going to mention, and that has led to another role that I'm doing for the for Harrow CCG, working in integrated care. But the SRTT role has come directly out of my work with the Training Hub, and that was how I know Celia. And so it was just to say really that sometimes opportunities just seem to come along often through people you know, or through contexts you find yourself in. And I think the world is a lot smaller than we can sometimes imagine. And so, yeah, just taking advantage of the kind of using the people you meet to ask questions and taking an interest in what different people are doing. I'm just trying to move. Oh, here we go. Move the slide along. So the reason that we're doing this webinar was because we have this vision that everyone who takes time out of general practice would experience a supported reintegration back into work. And you know, if you look at the demographics of GPs coming through, it tends to be a younger female monopoly now, and so many women will be trying to juggle maternity and work, but there are also other reasons why people might take time out of practice, and just this idea of valuing our workforce, valuing our colleagues, and the understanding that it is tough to come out of clinical practice. I've done it myself for 2 years of not working at all in medicine and then having to re-enter. And so the fact that there needs to be a transition process that's supported, and also just that we would have a culture of care, not just for our patients, but for one another and within our teams and our practices. And in fact, if you're interested in working with me on helping develop this, there may well be opportunities for that coming up, depending on whether my bids are successful for more money so that we can scale this up. Sorry, I'll just go back. I was thinking about how we have all these different areas of our life that you can separate into your professional life, your home life, your finances. We've been thinking about your personal growth and development and your career progression, and then of course your own health and well-being, which are hugely important. But the reality is they don't sit neatly into sections of a pie, and this is where the concept of whole systems comes in for me, and this is one of the ideas that I was introduced to through my fellowship, but really resonated with me, that we as people are living systems. Even our human body, you can't really take one organ because it has to work in conjunction with other things. And so this is a picture of my garden, and this is before I repainted it, but there are, if you can see, there are plants in pots there, and this is often this is when you try and deconstruct everything into things that stand alone, when the reality is more like the kind of messier bed on the left, where all the roots are entangled, and you can't really take one thing out without it affecting something else. And I think that it's really important to have that in mind as you're thinking about, you know, if you're becoming a mum or a mum again, even just that your identities are all merged, of whether you're a doctor or a mum or both, and being a partner or a carer or a friend, and that all of these things actually overlap in our lives, and we can't contain them neatly in the way that would be a lot easier. And so it was just to say that we're wanting to recognise that and finding work that works for you in your unique and individual context. And then the last thing I wanted to just bring up was the amount of free coaching and mentoring opportunities that are available to NHS staff and to GPs at the moment is really great, and I've used a couple of these myself. So there's links there for both the NHS England Looking After You 2 programme that has really easily accessible coaching. The London Leadership Academy offer mentoring and coaching, and the Faculty of Leadership and Management do the same, and there's a link to their career pathways on their website, which is quite helpful for GPs. And then lastly, I just wanted to flag up a couple of resources that I found really helpful. So the Next Generation GP, I did their course actually and found it really helpful, which is the idea is to inspire leadership amongst newly qualified GPs. And they have a website and a program that you can apply to, but they also have a podcast that I found so inspiring, which is a doctor called Imogen Staveley, who's a GP portfolio mum who's done amazing things with her short career so far, and it was just a really great way of listening to people's journeys and understanding how she'd got some of her opportunities. And then you're probably all aware of the Facebook group for Physicians Mums Group UK. There's a podcast called You Are Not a Frog, which is all about helping GP resilience and well-being, very specific to general practice and the pressures and stresses that we experience. And then finally, your main resource is the people around you, your relationships, like I said, using those contacts to help you. So that's the end of my slides. I'm going to try and stop sharing. Have I stopped sharing? Thank you. It's very disconcerting. I just was looking at my PowerPoint, so I was hoping I hadn't left the call. But yeah, those were my closing thoughts, really. We've just got a link. I don't know, Hannah, if you're able to pop that in the chat, because I'd really love, I know there's only a few of us, but any feedback that can help us towards the bid, like I said. Otherwise, I'm going to try and find it myself. But I don't know if you've got any closing remarks, Claire or Celia, or anyone with further questions.
No, I guess it just, oh, there's an echo, sorry. I guess it is just back to, you never get that time with your baby again. You've got 40 years in your career. Do the things that are fun and interesting. But you have to pay your mortgage, sadly.
Very wise, thank you. I'm just getting the link up. Oops.
I would say now more than ever, on the whole, practices and employers really do want to help and be flexible. And there really are lots of great resources out there that have been sort of covered today. Please use them. Please don't feel in any way that it's a negative to be taking up these resources that are available to you. They're great and they're run by good people. So please use them, because it's going to be what's going to keep you happy and well at work.
Thank you so much for the words of wisdom from two people that I admire a lot. Who've gone ahead of us. I've put the link to the type form. It's literally 5 questions. So Harriet and Kate and anyone else, if you're able to just complete that will just help us to know whether we've gauged this with the right kind of information. And you can complete that after we've finished the call. But I'm going to formally end the webinar now, unless there's any further questions. But I want to thank all of the amazing speakers who have such expertise and wisdom that they've shared with us. And I really hope that this webinar is going to be of use to many more as we're able to share this at the end of the event. So thank you for your time, and thank you, Harriet and Kate and baby.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
You're welcome.